these differences, cultural factors, less opportunities, societal messaging about physical activity, even religious prescriptions in some cases. But the bottom line is women are being, have lower levels of physical activity. And women may have different physical activity interests. So physicians and staff that are going to do counseling need to remember to put that in when they're talking to men versus women, that they may choose different goals, and you want to encourage them to choose goals that they want to reach and that are attainable for them. So then I looked at some recent reviews on physical activity interventions because, like Joan was saying, it's not going to be the same in every group. So looking at a recent literature review on physical activity interventions for African American women, they were able to find 13 well-designed, randomized controlled types of interventions to promote physical activity among African American women. 9 of those 13 studies reported positive outcomes. 7 of the 13 reported significant increases in physical activity. And many of these programs were in community settings, including churches, but also could be in senior centers or other types of community centers. So Joan, that also goes back to what you're talking about. Outdoors may not be safe, but a lot of neighborhoods that we might not say are safe neighborhoods have safe places within the context of those neighborhoods when you think about whether there's a church there, whether there's a community center, whether there's a YMCA or some other type of thing. And in focus groups that I've done with low-income women, they talked a lot about the biggest challenge for them is, can they afford to go to the place that's safe? And so that's, I think, another thing we can decide as a society is, how do you make sure those community settings where we can have safe physical activity are available to people essentially for free? Schools, senior centers, churches, we need programs that work in those settings that are essentially free for people so they can come and be physically active. So these 2 women reviewing, Bland and Sharma, recommended that physical activity interventions for African American women focus on increasing physical activity as the key goal, not as weight loss goals. They looked at a variety of different activities in these interventions. They included walking groups, line dancing, praise dancing, and Zumba, so a lot of different dance interventions, and these were found to be feasible and acceptable and able to deliver that program effectively in a community setting. They also said they need more studies that have larger sample sizes because some of them were smaller sample sizes. You'll hear about one of mine in a bit. Oops, what did I do? And that interventions need to be based on theoretical behavior change models. So this is another thing about physical activity is we have pretty good evidence about how to change behavior. It's hard. I would be the first to say that. It's hard for me. But we kind of know what can work, and if you design those physical activity interventions based on those theoretical behavior change models, it's been shown that they do work better.
May I ask you a question about the evidence on if a person watches videos at home? I saw this wonderful resource in the UK. The National Health Service has done this series of exercise videos that are truly outstanding. And I just wonder, do people do that at home? Is it effective? Do they keep it up?
I think if people do it at home over a long period of time, it is. I told Matt my story about my mom. My mom's favorite was doing this like Air Force physical activity program that she did consistently at home. It worked great for her. She also played tennis, but she had her little way that she could exercise at home, and she believed firmly that if it worked for pilots, it was going to work for her. That's what she did. I know for me, I have bought probably 20 different videos to try at home. And I try them a few times, and then I'm like, I'm alone. I like exercising with other people. I like going walking with a friend. I like being in a dance class. And so I think that's the other thing to recognize is that some of the evidence shows that having social support is a key element of having people exercise longer and exercise more consistently. And so I think we just, again, we have to be aware when we're creating physical activity interventions, who are we targeting it on? Are we Is there a value that they have around the social factor, social support, and how do we incorporate that to make it work for people? I didn't find a review of just interventions among Latinas, but I did find this nice review of looking at physical activity studies and looking at associations. This included 21 studies and showed that low levels of leisure time physical activity track with living in poverty, below 100% of the federal poverty line, and with having lower levels of education. So this study from Tover et al. From 2018 noted that occupational physical activity can be high in people, and they will still have lower rates of leisure time physical activity. So you have to be aware that you're balancing this, and this is again Jones workers. They're working very hard all day. Maybe people don't want to come home and, you know, do some sort of exercise at home. But it sounded like maybe those women could come out of the factory and form a social group in a safe place to exercise together for some amount of time after their work is over. So being aware of these, weighing off the occupational physical activity with the leisure time physical activity. And then they had higher levels of physical activity if they knew other people who exercised, or they observed people who were exercising in their neighborhoods. And then this goes back again to safe neighborhoods. If you live in an unsafe neighborhood, you probably don't see a lot of people out exercising, and you're certainly probably not going to see a lot of women out exercising. Not to overgeneralize, but you know, in unsafe places, women are probably going to be more likely to be reticent than a man might be, especially a big guy. They also noticed a positive association between levels of physical activity and religious service attendance. So again, sometimes there are values that you might use in a physical activity intervention that speaks to people's religious and cultural values that will enhance that intervention. Having social support from friends was associated with higher rates of leisure time physical activity. They did see mixed results for acculturation in physical activity, but generally in some of the studies, more acculturated Latinas had higher levels of meeting physical activity recommendations. But recognize acculturation may also be tracking with education, may also be tracking with income, so it's a little hard to disaggregate some of those. This study I loved was a mixed method study, which is what I usually use in my studies. I love to put more than one method in the study. Simonson et al. In 2015, they used a gender-based approach to develop a healthy lifestyles intervention in a diverse group of women, and they wanted to target 5 different ethnic groups. They first used their survey data, their state survey data, the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey, and they were able to look at the rates of meeting physical activity targets among these 5 ethnic groups and compare with the white category. All of the women of color had lower rates of physical activity than the white category. On the other hand, 20% of all of the women reported no leisure time physical activity. So that's that inactivity level that Matt talked about too, that there's a pretty high percent of people who are essentially inactive. And then they did some focus groups. They did focus groups with African American women, with African immigrant women, with American Indian, Alaska Native women, with Latinas, and with Pacific Islanders. And then they looked across these groups to see what were some of the common themes that women talked about. So they did talk about having limited resources, whether that's the ability to pay or time resources. Time influences their ability to be physically active. They noted that norms around healthy weight can vary by community. So again, not setting the goal to be weight loss per se, but to set the goal to be more physically active. And there's quite a bit of evidence that demonstrates that higher rates of physical activity will offset overweight in the sense of women not needing to be skinny in order to benefit from physical activity. And so that's another societal message I think that we need to convey too, is being physically active doesn't mean you have to be anorexic, you know. So women also believe they can influence healthy behaviors in their families, so we want to capitalize on some of the positive values that are held there. And they noted that men and women have different things that influence their behaviors. There's an evidence guide for physical activity, the Guide to Community Preventive Services, the Community Guide, is an evidence-based resource of what works in public health, like the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force resource that we use for a lot of the clinical interventions. The CPSTS is an independent panel using systematic literature review to develop evidence-based approaches. So today we're kind of focusing on the individual level interventions, both what Matt talked about and what I'm talking about, individually adapting health behavior change programs where you tailor it to the person's interests and needs, where they do goal setting, where they do problem solving, where they are, what was the word you used, not reluctant, but ambivalent about, helping people get over their problems that they have, and helping people incorporate and maintain physical activity. And those types of programs have been shown to consistently increase physical activity and fitness. And then social support interventions, which is what I was saying to Hattie, in community settings, these types of programs that focus on building social support networks, buddy systems, walking groups, dance programs, these supportive relationships are shown to help people exercise more often. It also covers, this guide also covers many other types of interventions that are evidence-based, like community-wide campaigns, which I heard somebody talking about earlier, TV, radio, newspapers. So you can go to this CDC Community Preventive Services Guide and read about community-wide campaigns, multi-component approaches, and environmental and policy approaches, which when we were talking to Neil earlier, we were talking about how closely can you mirror something like physical activity change against something that we feel like we've done relatively successfully, which is smoking cessation. But environmental and policy approaches to behavior change were shown to be very important parts of change in smoking behavior nationally. And so changes in the community's physical environment to provide opportunities. It's the lighting that Joan talked about. It's the safety things, support and visual cues that help people to be more active by making it easier and safer for them to make those changes, which includes things like point of decision prompts and stairwells to get people to use stairwells instead of taking the elevator. And then just generally, the evidence about physical activity interventions effects on health, that these increases can impact health at any age. That's a message we want to definitely get across to people. That lower levels of physical activity, time or intensity, are things that can still positively impact cardiovascular health. So it's Matt called it the little steps, I call it the baby steps, and I literally say that. What's the little step, what's the baby step that you might be able to do, that you might be able to change to get a little bit of physical activity. I don't say you need to exercise 150 minutes a week, because I can't even do that every week. So, creating that expectation that a little bit of change is both possible, achievable, and positive for health. Physical activity effects on older adults. They get cardiovascular benefits. They also get cognitive and mood benefits. And resistance training is reducing falls. So these are all a variety of different health benefits for people at all ages. In a recent review from 2018, dance interventions were found as effective as other physical activity interventions. So, with someone saying like, well, shouldn't I be working out at the gym? Shouldn't I be doing a triathlon or something like that? No, if you like to dance, dance works as well as other kinds of interventions. And this was based on 28 articles that they reviewed, and then they actually did a meta-analysis from 23 of the studies. And these were all studies that directly compared the dance intervention with another form of physical activity intervention, and dance was found as effective as those other ones. In addition, overall, relative to exercise, dance reduced BMI and total fat mass more. And so I think physicians and staff can safely prescribe dance and recommend dance for physical activity and overall health. So now I want to just hone in a really tiny bit to one of our studies about designing a culturally acceptable physical activity intervention for women. And we started off the day with seeing some of our UC Berkeley students doing Bollywood dance. But this was one of our UC Berkeley Joint Medical Program medical students, Lynn Madison, who was a student of Indian dance and designed a Bollywood dance intervention working with a dance instructor, who then was paid to lead classes for a study of South Asian women with type 2 diabetes. This was a randomized controlled trial, so women were randomized to either the dance exercise intervention or a control group that was a usual care group. And the key result, the number one outcome that we were looking at, was the intervention group demonstrated a statistically significant reduction in hemoglobin A1C from baseline compared with the control group. So very positive outcome. Cures D, the culturally relevant exercise for type 2 diabetes, was an 8-week Bollywood dance program. It was conducted at a community center. The community center was the India Community Center in the Bay Area, where women felt comfortable already coming as members of that community center. And then based on prior qualitative work, the PI also believed that a dance exercise program could be conducted there and would be acceptable to those women. Dance programs also provide group cohesion and support, and you could really see that throughout this. This is a picture of the dance class in progress. This intervention also included resistance training, and we messaged women during those activities that they did warm-up. They did 30 minutes of moderate physical activity, and then they went and got hand weights from a side rack and continued to do dance moves using their weights. So this is the section of the dance where they're using their weights. And they were counseled that they need both types of activity, and the level of weight can be varied quite a bit depending on if you have other issues like arthritis or pain in your hands or something. In terms of weight loss, those participants that attended at least 62% of the sessions had statistically significant reductions in weight compared to the ones who attended fewer sessions, so it demonstrated there was a dose response in the intervention. And then even those participants who didn't lose weight in the intervention group still showed significant reductions in their hemoglobin A1C. So it was an impact on probably glucose metabolism in the muscles and not just a weight loss thing. Again, it supports the need to say to women, being physically active is important, separate from anything related to weight change. And this is a video that might not work since it didn't work for Matt, but this is the class in progress, and I thought we could just watch really briefly, maybe one, only watch it. This is the dance instructor at the front, and you can hear the music is aerobic music. She's incorporated a lot of aerobic moves, but also the dance moves. She's counting for him. So there's a lot of moving. It's very active. And that's fun. They're dancing to music in a place they feel safe, where they're comfortable, in a place that they know. And they got good results. And another thing that was great was that they also had very high retention rate in the study. So 82% of the women remained in the study, which is a nice retention in a study. And they got a formal invitation to come and participate in the Bollywood dance class. And then at the end of the 8-week intervention with the first group of women, the women who were not in the intervention group also got an invitation to come and participate in the Bollywood dance class. And it was offered in the midday to allow working women to come. But that actually was one of the feedbacks that people got, was an hour-long class, which you then also have to change back into work clothing after, is still a pretty long chunk out of the workday. So we may need to modify, lengths of time to allow working women to also come to these. And that's our team. Amla is the one on my far right. You're right too. And she's now a pediatrician in Southern California. And I'd like to just acknowledge ICC directors and staff for giving us this space, and then Dr. Latha Palaniappan, who is at Stanford, but also was at Palo Alto Medical Foundation, who helped us recruit the patients. And then Brian, even though my slides aren't as good as Matt's, they are way better than they would be without Brian. So, I just want to say thank you to Brian for that. And thank you to dancers. You know, I think that it's a fun and engaging activity that can really help women be more active.
Yeah. Wow, thank you.
Wanted to
Right.
have time for questions.
I think we have a question right there, and then Matt needs to say something. Yeah.
In addition to the dance class, did they incorporate anything about food choices or cultural differences with the food that they prepare?
They didn't in this one, but what I noticed in that review of the interventions of African American women is about half of them were more lifestyle than just physical activity, and they seem to have included messages about diet. And I do think that you can do that. You know, you sort of have to make a decision how you're going to craft your intervention and what are the important things that you really need to get across. So something like, Joan, I keep pointing to you, I think you said something about sodium restriction. So if there's a key other message that you feel is really important for this group, then that might be part. One intervention that's church-based in Oakland, they do have exercise class, but they also have cooking class. And it's kind of the same group of people, so it might not be the same hour, but making that available to that same group of people who have high blood pressure. There's a physical activity class on this day, and then there's this cooking class where you can learn how to cook low-sodium food. And when I was in private practice, now I just have medical patients like Matt, but you know, when I was in private practice, I used to have recipe books because I didn't feel like I could speak to everybody's diet. And I can't say like, eat low salt and lots of fruits and vegetables, and people would be like, that tastes bad, you know. So I needed to be able to say, and here's some recipes that reflect, you know, the kind of cooking you might want to do with your folks at home, or, you know, specific types of foods that, you know, I thought that patient might prefer, and just give that out as a way that helps support, you know, dietary change. So, you know, I mean, I think there are ways for practice to spread those duties across more people and get this kind of stuff out there. And we were able to do it with health coaches at Asian Health Services in one of our health coach projects. We used MAs who were trained as health coaches, and we found that the MAs didn't actually have very much dietary knowledge. And so we had to design a curriculum to train them to have higher level of dietary knowledge, because then they could talk to your patient about diet. And it's hard to talk to your patient about changing their diet or physical activity if you don't have kind of the basic info about how they're going to benefit.
Thank you.
So I know we're at 2.
Okay, any other questions though for Dr. Ivey?
Yeah.
Please.
So we alluded to earlier that a very high-risk group was the Asian Indians. And they are also a low exercise group on the slide as well. So in the group you had doing the Bollywood dancing, etc., they're all women. What do we have to throw at the male Asian Indians who are at very high risk?
Cycling.
I know. Well, in one of the studies that I did, the Cardiovascular Health in Asian Indian study, we did do focus groups with men and women separate. And men were more interested in sports. I mean, they wanted to play cricket, they wanted to play soccer, you know, there were just other types of activities that they wanted to engage in. So sometimes I think, you know, it's harder without knowing your geographic area, like Matt said, how to advise somebody. But if Matt knows there's a soccer field that's at such and such a place, and that's a place that somebody can go and kick a ball around with some other guys, or pick up basketball, you know, at the high school, or, you know, whatever. You got to know your area in order to advise people, you know, on sports too. You know, it's not as easy as saying, you know, join, you know, the gym.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of free access if you know your community and can speak to that.
The reason I said cycling, though, is that there was an article
I love
this
that.
weekend on super agers, those who are, look 20 years younger at age 80. They found cyclists who met the mark of 100 miles or more a week have the immune systems of very young people, and they have fantastic biometrics. So that's a really hard bar. But there are, say, in Silicon Valley, you see a lot of people doing the super cycling. So just as a way to encourage men more, let's not do the dancing. We blew it on that one, sorry. We'll emphasize that.
We enjoyed those dances.
One quick reminder, I'd like to remind everyone that Matt has invited us all up to Emerald Bay this weekend to hike around Emerald Bay. And the good news is, you don't have to run faster than the bear, you just have to run faster than Matt.
Other guy.
Yeah.
Right on, buddy. All right. Okay, so what you said about unhealthy diet, time was the number one thing. The reason that we are inactive, same thing, time. Everybody is concerned about the amount of time that we have. Everybody is stressed about things that we have in our schedule. And so taking time was number one on both that you thought. Taste and flavor was number two on the diet. And unavailability was number three. And on the inactivity after time was pain and difficult mobility and availability. And then inertia. What he says. A lot of things are important, and the numbers were fairly close. Tiredness, feeling hopeless were other things that were mentioned. Costs. Even on activities said costs. Remember, we need to find ways that people can do things without necessarily being in the gym. Then things that, reasons that you didn't have a discussion about lifestyle in your visit. People said, every visit. Nobody's ever talked to me about that. Well, okay. Time, but also people mentioned that providers didn't know. It's interesting on here. I'll take this. This will be useful. A lot of this was that there's no toolkits. We don't think the providers really know how to speak, and I agree. They don't. The doctors have not really been trained in this area very much at all, and they don't have a lot of comfort in it because of that. Competing priorities in time, obviously, not incentivized. We mentioned that. Somebody said, the change in nutrition info, the standards have kind of changed a little bit. I remember when I was in college, carbohydrates were great, Yeah. So that's changed a little bit. We've had to kind of learn about, get more knowledge. Interestingly, knowledge was last on both over on this survey, which I agree, and that's what the journals that I read talked about. It's not really so much a problem of knowledge. People kind of know that they need to be moving, they need to eat fruits and vegetables. More team-based. What would make us more successful? Use the staff more. Educate. Get tools out there. Refer to dedicated preventive centers if you have one. Present real lifetime story in less than 2 minutes. Yeah, stories are awesome in every aspect. Increased number of providers. That'd be great. Education videos in the waiting room. There's a tremendous video that I'm looking to get that shows examples of how to get active that I'd love to run in our waiting rooms, and I'm still working on that.
Just play happy.
Or just play happy. Individualized plan for calories and activity per patient's condition, include in every daily practice and flow. Okay, so great feedback. Thank you for that. In the Air Force, you are forced into it. You have to, you run a mile every year. You run a mile and a half. You do number of push-ups and number of sit-ups in a minute, and then you're weighed. And my goal was always to be above 90 percentile, which I was able to do, but I really wanted to hit 100. The only reason I was able to hit 100 before I retired, you know why? Because I turned 50. And then the standards got easier, and I could run a mile and a half in 10 and a half minutes and get 100 points. So So that's how we do it in the Air Force. I mean, it is one of the most common reasons for people to be booted out of the military is not meeting the fitness standards.
I just wanted to tell you something we did, and it was interesting what happened. The people on the farm, I call it peanut farm, but it wasn't, pistachios, they were